Hello, candidates, and welcome back to the lesson. The subject is Advanced Financial Management. In today's lesson, we continue with the topic Real Estate Valuation or Finance. We've been studying on how to value real estate, and we've been considering various methods. So far, we've learned how to value real estate using the cost approach method. We've also learned how to value real estate by applying the income approach method. Today, our focus will be on the sales comparison method, which is also known as the market data approach or the comparable sales approach. Comparable sales approach or sales comparison method. Now, in this lesson, we will analyze the steps that an appraiser may go through in using this approach. We also look at the situations or scenarios when or where the sales comparison method is appropriate. We will furthermore study the limitations of this approach. Then we'll work out one illustrative example on the sales comparison method. So this method, candidates, is, we can say, one of the widely used approaches in valuation of real estate. It operates on the principle of substitution. The principle of substitution, which states that a rational buyer will pay no more for an asset or property than they would for reasonably close substitute. You understand? So if you are to buy a house, for instance, a rational buyer will pay no more for a property than they would for a reasonably close substitute. So if there are two houses, because candidates, you are talking about comparison, right? Comparison method. So if this is maybe property A, then we have property B. So if a buyer would want to purchase property A, if a buyer would want to purchase property A, we are assuming here that the buyer is a rational buyer. So such a buyer will not pay more for this property A than what they would reasonably pay for a close substitute. And this substitute could be property B or house B. So this approach estimates the value of a subject property. So assuming this A is the subject property, the property that ought to be valued, okay? So the approach I'm saying estimates the value of a subject property by comparing it to similar properties that have recently been sold in the same market area. So if you are to value property A, if property A is to be valued, then this approach, if this approach is to be used, then similar properties in the same area will be used to value property A. So you may have even property C here, property C, property C. All right, property C. That is the core idea. The core idea, candidates, is to value a subject property by comparing it with similar properties. So A is a subject property, B, C are what we call comparables. We call them comparables, such that the sales price of these comparable projects are adjusted to account for differences between them and the subject. Do you understand? If you are to value property A, I repeat, the sales approach method, well, in using the sales approach method, we look at the similar properties in the area, and since no property can be exactly similar, certain adjustments may be made in the process of adjusting the prices of the properties that were sold, so that the price or value of property A may be determined. Understand? The sales price of comparable properties are adjusted to account for differences between them and the subject property. The difference could be the size of the house. It could be, the differences could be on the basis of additional features. Maybe this property has additional features than property A. You may find that property B has 3 bedrooms. This one has 2 bedrooms. Property A may have 2 bathrooms. Property B has 1 bathroom. So there could be differences or variation. So adjustments are made to the properties that were sold previously in order to determine the price of the subject property. So in this lesson, we go through the steps. First of all, let's analyze some of the steps that can be followed in valuing property using the sales comparison method. Step number one is to identify comparable sales. 1, identify comparable sales. Identify comparable projects. Identify comparable sales. The first and most crucial step is to identify recently sold properties that are similar to the subject property in terms of the key characteristics. So if you are to value a house in, say, Kilimani area, you identify a house that has similar characteristics in Kilimani area that have been sold recently. So identify comparable sales. And these characteristics, okay, we're saying that you identify recently sold properties that are similar to the subject property in terms of the key characteristics. And these characteristics could include the location, characteristics with similar characteristics. These characteristics could be the location. Location is one key characteristic. Ideally, comparables should be in the same neighborhood or a very similar or competing area. B, property type, because comparing similar types of properties e.g. a bungalow to another bungalow, not a bungalow with an apartment. No, they have to be of property type. If it's a bungalow, then identify, if you are seeking to value the bungalow, then you have to identify bungalows. You cannot compare bungalow with apartments and so on. So the property type should be similar. Another key feature is the size. Size. The comparable, another key characteristic is the size. The size should be similar in terms of the square footage. The square footage of the house should also be almost similar or similar. The living area, the lot size, the number of rooms, the bathrooms, the bedrooms, the kitchen. You look at the sizes of the comparables and the subject property. Understand? Age is another key characteristic, and we can put it together with condition. What is the condition of the subject property? What is the condition of the comparables? Comparables should be of similar age and in a comparable state of repair and also maintenance. Features. Another key characteristic is the features and amenities. Features and amenities. There ought to be similar features like garage, fireplaces, swimming pools, the quality of finishes, the floor, is it tiled like the one of the subject property or not, the views and so on. Features and amenities. The comparable should have similar features and amenities compared to the subject property. EF, date of sale. Date of sale. Sale should be as recent as possible to reflect current market conditions. If you are to do comparison of sales between the comparables and the subject property, then this is a very key feature. The date should be as close as possible. Should be as recent in the recent past, so that market prices so that so as to reflect the current market conditions, and it should be typically within just say 3 months to 12 months, not more than that. When using the sales comparison method, 3 to 12 months period is the preferred period. You understand, candidates? We are going through the steps to follow when valuing property using the sales comparison approach, the sales comparison method. And step number 1, we have said, identify comparable properties or comparable sales. And we've defined these comparables, candidates. These are the selling prices of, these are comparable properties, comparable properties, comparable properties. The first and the most important step is to identify comparable sales. And these sales or properties should have these characteristics. These characteristics should be similar. The characteristics of the comparable sales should be similar to the ones of the subject property. So one key characteristic is the location, property value, the size, the age and condition, features and amenities, date of sale. Date of sale. So candidates, after identify the comparable sales, the second step is to gather data. And what is this data? This is data on comparables. Gather data on comparables. Once potential comparables are identified, then detailed information about their sale price, their date of sales, the specific characteristics needs to be gathered and verified. They need to be gathered and verified after identify the comparable projects. Then the next step is to gather data in regard to the comparables. And this data could be the selling prices, the dates of sale, the specific characteristics, and so on. And all these data should be verified. And there are many sources of data, candidates. If one has to get information, could be through maybe going through public records like the land registry, the tax authorities' offices, the the capital markets, I mean the multiple listing services. The real estate agents can also provide gather about land, about houses, and so on. So gather data on comparables. Step number 3 is to analyze and adjust comparables. Is to analyze and adjust. Because we recall, we say that it's not possible to have properties that have exact identical features. It's not possible. There will be variations, and therefore the third step is to analyze and adjust the comparables. Since no two properties are exactly alike, adjustments must be made to the sale prices of the comparables in order to account for any differences between them and the subject property. And these adjustments can either be additions or even subtractions to the comparable sales price. And the common adjustments, candidates, the common adjustments categories include the time of sale, the location, the physical characteristics, the terms and conditions of sale, and so on. For example, when you talk about the time of sale being one of the adjustments, the appraiser may need to adjust for changes in market conditions between the sale date of the comparable and the valuation date of the subject property, because we are talking about the comparables being sold a few months prior to the date when the subject property is being valued. So there has to be adjustment in terms of the time of sale. Another adjustment could be in relation to the location. The appraiser may need to adjust for differences, in desirability or even just features of the neighborhood. Furthermore, there could also be physical characteristics where the appraiser may adjust for differences in size, in age, in condition, in quality of construction, the number of rooms, and specific features. So that is step number 3. Analyze and adjust comparables. Step 4, the fourth step is to reconcile adjusted values. Reconcile adjusted values. Now, after a range of adjustments, after say making all necessary adjustments to the selling price of the comparables, then the appraiser will have a range of adjusted values. And the final step is to reconcile such adjusted values to arrive at a single estimated value or a narrow range of values for the subject property. After making adjustments to these prices of similar property that was sold previously, after adjustments have been made, then the last step is to reconcile the adjustments and arrive at an adjusted value. And that involves considering the reliability and also the relevance of each comparable and giving more weight to those that are more similar to the subject and the ones that require fewer adjustments. So if property B requires fewer adjustments compared to property C, then property B will be given more weight after making adjustments to the prices. And candidates, what we are discussing here will come out clearly when we be looking at a practical example. Within this lesson, we are going to work out an illustrative example on how to make these adjustments and how to arrive at the selling price of the subject property, Now let's move on and discuss the scenarios or the situations where the sales comparison method may be appropriate. Ideal scenarios for using sales comparison. When is the sales comparison method most ideal? That's the question we want to answer, right? Ideal scenarios for using sales comparison approach. One such scenario is active and liquid markets. Active and liquid markets. When there are sufficient number of recent sales of properties that are similar to the subject property in the same or closely comparable market area, then the sales comparison approach is an ideal approach to use when valuing property, such that a high volume of transactions, because a high volume of transactions provides more data points for comparison and adjustments. Here I drew just 2 houses which are comparables, but an appraiser may consider even 10 houses or 15 houses. And that can only be possible where there are a high volume of transactions, where many houses have been sold within that same neighborhood. So that is one scenario that will allow for an appraiser to opt for the sales comparison approach. And this is often the case for standard residential properties in a well-established neighborhoods. The second scenario is homogeneous properties. Homogeneous properties. When the subject property belongs to a relatively standardized or a homogeneous group of properties with similar characteristics, then this method can be used. You can think of a typical single-family homes in a subdivision of, say, units in a complex. Think of that. You have a complex with standard homes or houses if you have a complex. And within that complex, there are houses that are of similar characteristics. Single-family homes in a complex. So if one of the houses is to be valued, then we can look at the selling prices of similar houses in the same complex. That's what we are referring to as homogeneous or standardized properties, homogeneous group. So that is another situation that will cause an appraiser to apply the sales comparison method when valuing property. Third scenario is owner-occupied residential properties. Owner-occupied residential properties. And how is it an ideal scenario? Now, for single-family homes, for townhouses, and even houses that are purchased for personal use, that we are referring to as owner-occupied residential properties. and the sales comparison approach is generally considered the most accurate and relevant because buyers in this segment often base their decisions on the prices of similar homes that have been recently sold. Understand? Yes. 4, vacant land. Land that is not occupied. Valuing undeveloped land relies heavily on comparing recent sales of similar vacant parcels of land in the same area, considering factors like size, location, zoning, accessibility, and so on. If you are to buy land candidates in a certain area, as a buyer, you'd want to know what are the recent prices of similar land in the same area. And that's what I'm referring to as vacant land being one of the scenarios that will cause an appraiser to use the sales comparison method. 5, properties with limited income. Properties with limited income, and basically this is the data, okay? Properties with limited income data. Let me say properties with limited income data or unique use. For example, we are talking about properties where income generation is not their primary driver. We have properties like churches, hospitals, and so on, where income is not the primary driver. So this method may be the most ideal to value such property, like the owner-occupied homes, or where income data is unreliable or even non-existent. Then the sales comparison approach becomes the most important than the income approach. 6, supporting other approaches. The sales comparison approach may also be used to support other approaches like the income approach, like the cost approach. Even when using the income or even the cost approach, the sales comparison approach can serve as a valuable check and balance to ensure that the derived value aligns with the market realities. Because the income approach and the cost approach do not rely on market data. So using the sales comparison method to support the other approaches is also an ideal scenario. So these are 6 ideal scenarios for using the sales comparison approach. Let's analyze the limitations. Now, candidate, the sales comparison approach, while a powerful tool in analyzing property, it has several limitations that can affect its accuracy and its applicability. One such limitation is that the approach requires data. It requires sufficient and comparable data. Requires sufficient. It requires sufficient and also comparable data. One has to gather sufficient data. You saw in step number 2, gather data on comparables. So the biggest limitation is its reliance on the availability of recent sales data for properties that are truly comparable to the subject property. And in markets with few transactions, or for unique properties with limited similar sales, the approach becomes difficult to apply reliably, and that can be a challenge in less active markets or even specialized properties and so on. It requires sufficient data, which may not always be available. Limitation number 2 is that there is difficulty in finding truly identical comparables. Difficulty identifying truly identical properties. If you are buying a house in Kajiado or you are buying a house in Thika, finding a truly identical house similar to the one that you are buying in the same location, candidates, can be a challenge because every property is unique. So finding comparables that are exactly the same as the subject property in all aspects are meaning location, in size, in age, in condition, and even features, is very rare. And that necessitates making adjustments, as we saw in the third step. Analyze and adjust comparables. So it's not easy to find purely identical properties, and therefore adjustments have to be made. Three, subjectivity of adjustments. Subjectivity of adjustments. Adjusting the sale prices of comparables to account for differences requires the appraiser's professional judgment. So determining the exact monetary value of each difference. It could be an additional bedroom, a reduction in bathrooms, a better view, how to put a monetary value for better view. We see candidates that can be very subjective. All right? And that can lead to inaccurate adjustments that can lead to skewed valuation. Four, market fluctuations. Market fluctuations is also another limitation associated with the sales comparison approach method of valuing property. The sales comparison approach relies on historical data. And in rapidly changing markets, expecting significant. We are talking about markets that may experience significant variations or changes. They could be appreciations or even depreciation. All the sales data may not accurately reflect current market values. So the comparison method relies on prices of, these are historical prices of comparables. And we know the market is not constant. Prices are always changing. So comparing a comparable that was sold 9 months ago to the prices of the current subject property can be misleading. And that calls for time adjustments. But accurately capturing rapid market shifts can be a challenge. 5, arm's length transactions. Arm's length transactions. What do I mean? Now, the sales comparison approach assumes that the comparable sales were arm's length transactions, meaning they occurred between unrelated parties, acting freely without undue influence. You understand that, candidates? It assumes that happened. Because we are relying on prices of comparables that took place 12 months, 9 months, 6 months ago. And the assumption is that the sales were arm's length, meaning that they occurred between unrelated parties. But we know, candidates, there could be sales between family members or sales that are carried out under undue influence. Someone may dispose a property because he wants to take to maybe pay for medical bills, okay, and makes very quick sale in order to raise money. So the amount raised may not reflect the market prices. So that is not an arm's length transaction. That is a transaction that has been carried out of undue influence. Or family members, the prices may be highly or heavily discounted because it's being sold to a related party, blood relations. So relying on such prices can be misleading. We are giving examples of sales between family members or sales that are carried out under undue influence, which may not reflect the market value and should be calculated or excluded or carefully considered. So when identifying comparables, it's important to identify or to verify that the transactions were carried out at arm's length. If not, then the prices may be misleading. So these are 5 limitations. They are not the only limitations. There are many more other limitations like extraordinary conditions of sale. Extraordinary condition of sale. Let me put it down. 6 extraordinary conditions of sale. Extraordinary conditions of sale. If comparable sales involved unusual circumstances, like seller concessions or forced sales, then that can distort the market price and may not be representative of the typical transaction. Another limitation is data accuracy and verification. There is a limitation to that extent. Okay? Data accuracy and verification. The accuracy of the valuation depends on the reliability of the data gathered on comparable sales. So verifying the details of each sale can be time-consuming, and inaccurate data will lead to an inaccurate valuation. Another limitation is that this approach is not ideal for income-generating property. It's not ideal for income-generating property. While sale of comparables can provide some light, I'm saying while sales of comparable investment properties can provide some light or insight, the sales comparison approach does not directly consider the income-generating potential of a property, which is a primary driver of the value for commercial and investment properties. That is the 7th limitation. There are many more limitations. You can go on and even mention the complexity with numerous adjustments. Complexity with numerous adjustments. When comparing the subject property with the comparables, there could be very many adjustments that are required, especially when a large number of significant adjustments are required to make the comparables similar to the subject. The reliability of the final value decreases. So each adjustment introduces a potential for error. So if you have 7 adjustments, then you may have 7 potential points of error, and that is a limitation. So that's it, candidates, for the sales comparison. We've defined what a sales comparison approach is in property valuation. We've identified the steps. This is step number 1, identify comparable sales. Step number 2, gather data on comparables. Step number 3, identify and adjust comparables. Then you reconcile adjusted values. You've seen 6 scenarios or ideal scenarios for using the sales comparable method. 1 is in relation to liquid markets. Number 2, homogeneous properties. Number 3, owner-occupied residential properties. Number 4, vacant land. Number 6, properties with limited income data. And lastly, the sales comparison approach can be used to support other valuation approaches. Then these are 6 limitations. So next is to work out an illustrative example. Let's turn to the illustration on your screen. Going to work out this very fast. You are trying to determine the value of a standard 3-bedroom bungalow with 2 bedrooms in Kilimani Estate in Nairobi. It's about 1,200 square feet and in average condition. You find 2 recent comparable sales in the same estate within the last 3 months. So we have data for comparable 1 and data for comparable 2. Comparable 1, the sales price is 15 million. The size is 1,150 square feet, which is slightly smaller than the subject. Then there are 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, which is same as the subject. The condition is average, same as subject. Then the sales date is 2 months ago. Comparable 2 sales price is 16 million. The size is 1,250 square feet, which is slightly larger than the subject. The bungalow has 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, same as subject. The condition is good, slightly better than the subject. The sales date is 1 month ago. Now, based on your market knowledge, not 1, there is market knowledge on the size difference. Each extra 50 square feet is worth approximately 200,000 shillings. There is market knowledge on number 2, condition difference. A property in good condition sells for about 300,000 shillings more than one on average condition in this estate. Then another knowledge you have gathered is time difference. The market has been relatively stable in the last 3 months, so there is no significant time adjustment that is needed. Required value of the standard 3-bedroom bungalow using comparables method. So candidates, here you are faced with a problem of valuing a standard 3-bedroom bungalow with 2 bathrooms in Kilimani Estate in Nairobi. So how do you value this bungalow? Using the sales comparison method, we are told that it's about 1,200 square feet and it is in average condition. So you find 2 recent comparable sales. So you have a bungalow to value, and when using the sales comparison method, you compare the selling price of recently sold bungalows in the same area. And we are given the data for comparable 1 and comparable 2. So there are 2 bungalows that you have identified, which can help you to value the property of the subject property, which is a 1,200, which sits on 1,200 square feet, and it is in average condition. So step number 1 is to identify comparable sales, which has happened. The question has identified comparable sales. there is data that has also been gathered. Through the question, we have market data. There is an order that reads, based on your market knowledge. So the market knowledge here is in terms of size difference, condition difference, and time difference. That data has been obtained. Then step number 3, which we are going to do, is to analyze and adjust comparables. Analyze and adjust comparables. Now look at comparable 1. Comparable 1, the size is 1,150 square feet. And you see the subject bungalow is 1,250. So the question is it larger or smaller? So the subject is larger. The subject is 1,200 square feet and comparable 1 is 1,150. So it is larger by 50 square feet. So we are applying adjustments. We are solving this problem. Solution. Let me take my black pen. So comparable 1. So we apply adjustments. So that's the third step. Comparable 1. The first feature is size. And we see when you compare the subject bungalow and the first comparable, the comparable is smaller by 50 square feet. Look at the question. The subject is 50 square feet larger. Subject is 50 square feet. The subject is 50 square feet larger. In other words, the comparable is 50 square feet smaller. And what does the question read? Look at the market knowledge. We read on size difference, each extra 50 square feet is worth approximately 200,000 shillings. So the subject is 50 square feet larger. So what do we do? And we are given the value of this 50 square feet. So we are going to add the 200,000 shillings to the comparable's price. This square feet is valued at 200,000 shillings. So we add 200,000 to the comparable price because it is smaller. The subject is larger. In other words, the comparable is smaller. So if it is smaller, then we add the 200 to the comparable's selling price. And what is the selling price? What is the selling price? The selling price of comparable 1 is 15 million. But before we move to the 15 million, let's analyze the second adjustment, which is condition difference. Market knowledge, condition difference, you can see there are candidates that a property in good condition sells for about 300,000 shillings more than one in on average condition in this estate. Now look at the condition of the first comparable. Condition. The condition is same as subject. Do you see that? Comparable 1 condition, it is the same as the subject. And if it is the same as the subject, then no adjustment is required. So the first one here was size. Then number 2 is the condition. What do we read? The condition is the same, so no adjustment. Therefore, no adjustment is required, or the adjustment is just 0. Adjustment is 0. Here we added 200,000. So we are analyzing candidates, we are applying adjustments. The first adjustment is size. The second one is condition. Look at the question again. The third adjustment, the market knowledge there, is the time difference. What information do we have on time difference? The market has been relatively stable in the last 3 months, so no significant time adjustment is needed. Okay? The market has been relatively stable, so there is no need to make an adjustment. All right? No adjustment is required in relation to the time. So therefore, the adjusted price for comparable 1, the adjusted price will be equal to the 15 million plus what we added here, 200,000, which is equal to 15.2 million. That is the adjusted price of comparable 1. Then let's apply adjustments to comparable 2. Comparable, the second comparable. So we begin with the size. What is the size of the comparable? Is it larger or smaller? Look at the question. Look at the information. We have the selling price of comparable 2. The size is 1,250 square feet. Slightly larger than the subject. Slightly larger than the subject. It is slightly larger than the subject. The subject is 50 feet smaller. Subject is 50 square feet smaller. It is 50 square feet smaller. The subject is smaller. That means the comparable is larger. So we are going to subtract 200,000 shillings from comparable price because it is smaller. Then the second adjustment will be in relation to the condition. What do we read for condition? Look at the information given. The comparable is in a better condition, slightly better than the subject. The comparable is in better condition. The comparable is in better condition. If it is in better condition, then we are going to subtract the 300,000 because in making adjustments we read a property in good condition sells for about 300,000 shillings more than one in average condition. So the comparable price is more by 300,000. Therefore, we are going to deduct the 300,000 from comparable price. Okay? Condition is better. This one is better. Therefore, subtract 300,000 from the comparable price, the comparable to price. So that is the second adjustment. Then look at the third one. The third one we read is in relation to time, and we read that time difference. The market has been relatively stable in the last 3 months, so no significant time adjustment is needed. So no time adjustment is also needed in comparable to. And therefore, the adjusted price here, adjusted price comparable to, will be equal to the price of comparable 2, which is 16 million. 16 million. We subtract the 200,000. Subtract 200,000. Is that the case? Yeah. Subtract 200,000. Then again we deduct 300,000. Deduct 300,000. This 300,000. This will be equal to, is it 16.5 or 15.5? 16 million minus 500,000 will be equal to 15,500,000. So that is the adjusted price for comparable 2. The adjusted price for comparable 1 is 15.2 million. Then that is candidates the second. If you are to go back to our steps, we have analyzed and made adjustments to the comparable price. So the fourth step is to reconcile. The last step here, we are going to do a reconciliation of these two prices. Reconcile adjusted values. These two are the adjusted values. We have adjusted the selling prices for the comparables. Now we have two adjusted sales price for comparable properties. That is property 1 and property 2, which is 15.2 million and 15.5 million. 15.5 million. These are two prices. And since both comparables are reasonably similar, since these two are reasonably similar, what are we going to do? They are reasonably similar to the subject, and even the adjustments are relatively minor. We can then estimate the value of subject property. We will estimate the value of subject property by getting the average price. Estimate value of subject property. We are going to estimate value of subject property by just getting the average, which is equal to 15.2 million plus 15.5 million divided by 2. That will give us the estimated value. 15.2, 15,200, 15,200 plus 15,500, 15,500 divided by 2, 15,350. This is equal to shillings 15,350,000. 15,350,000 shillings is the estimated value of the subject property. This is the estimated value of the subject property. Based on the sales comparison approach, the estimated value of the subject, which is a 3-bedroomed bungalow, is 15,350,000 Kenya shillings. And candidates, in a real appraisal, the analysis would be more detailed. We are just using this simplified example to help you understand the procedure. But in a real appraisal, the analysis would be more detailed, potentially involving more comparables, could be 10 or even 15 comparables, and more adjustments based on a thorough market research in Kilimani Estate area. So that's it for today's lesson. This lesson brings us to the end of the subtopic on real estate valuation. In this subtopic, we've learned how to value property based on three main approaches. We began with the income approach. The previous lesson we did the cost approach. Today we have finalized this subtopic by learning how to value property using the sales comparison approach. Thank you for attending this lesson. I hope to meet you in our subsequent sessions where we continue to share knowledge in real estate finance, which is a topic in advanced financial management. Bye-bye.